my paraphrase version. It's better to go to a funeral than a party.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Thank you so much for you who are listening to have helped us become a top 10 strategic planning podcast 2 years in a row. Thank you for your support. And it helps bring people like Tyson Ray to our podcast. We only let in about 10% of applicants. So if people are getting to you now, it's because they're really, really good. As a matter of fact, Tyson did something even more amazing. We almost exclusively only recorded Fridays, and somehow his team was able to get in on a Thursday to record this. Of course, when you a miracle. So people who are listening, typically it's Tuesdays when you come and release early in the morning. But Tyson got in. He's got a good team. He's CEO and founding partner of Forum Wealth Advisor. He specializes in helping business owners and high net worth family build and preserve and transition wealth, which is so important when you create value and passing it on. He has over 25 years in the industry, and he had some designations. He isn't just having fun here. As a CFP, SEMA, SEPA, he's been recognized by Forbes and Barron's as a top wealth advisor. He's also the author of The Total Relationship, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. Tyson, by the way, we love getting copies of signed books, and we put back here in our bookcase to talk about that. He's passionate about aligning financial success with life and purpose, and he also has charitable causes that we'll talk about as well. Hey, Tyson, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
I feel like that, I like to under promise and over deliver. I feel like that setup is like, oh boy, here we go. Got some big shoes to fill all of a sudden.
Hey, no, you're here, you're legit once again, and you do amazing things. That's why you are here. And I always love to start with a good story, and you had a pretty good one, and this is very real, especially considering the current war again with Iran, and the US and Israel. So tell us about 2 years ago, where you were at and what happened to you.
Yeah, so the whole family 2 years ago was looking to take a trip with our church through Israel's kind of holy sites, and, it got canceled in 24 because of the war with Gaza. Our middle son went off to college, went to Baylor, surprised us last summer when he signed up. He actually was the only kid that signed up to do an internship in Israel, and he was actually in country when the 12-day war happened with US bombing the nuclear and whatever else, and we actually had to get him extracted out of Israel through Amman, Jordan, and flown home, and it was quite an experience. Well, and things kinda all settled down, and, we decided to sign up, and my wife and I and my youngest son and 30 of us from our church went to finally do the trip that was supposed to be in 2024, and, we got about 4 days into it and found ourselves in the middle of sirens, and Jerusalem's was kind of became our little bomb shelter hub for several days as we got to experience what my son experienced about 9 months earlier. And we'll still see how that plays out because we're recording this. We just gotten back about a week ago, but that mess over there is still playing itself out. So it was an interesting experience.
Okay, so it's really interesting. It's one thing watching on TV, right? How close were you? Pretty real, very close. Like you could hear it, explosions. Like, give me kind of concept for
Yeah.
those of us.
Yeah. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday night. So we were 4 days into it, and I was going to bed, and I was like, oh, you know what? I only felt four of them. And what I was feeling is that there's three layers to the Iron Dome: the ones that kind of catch them when they come off the ground, wherever they're coming from; one that catch them in orbit, and one that catches them when like they're in proximity, like they're going to hit something. That's the Iron Dome. That's the last line of defense. And what I was saying, I was feeling, which is kind of like the finality of the grand, at the 4th of July, where you feel the percussion.
Mm.
Although I was feeling it through the hotel's cement walls, but you were feeling the percussion of being the final line of defense being taken out. And I was like, oh, I only felt four of those today. Like that's a lot better than yesterday, and especially from the day, like it progressively was getting less for the 4 days that we were there, or the days that we were there. But then I kind of caught myself, and I'm like, think about what you just said. So it was um, it was an interesting experience. I actually celebrated my 51st birthday over there. Spent the day in a hotel room by myself, and kind of was processing. Hey, when you get out, what matters, what doesn't matter, what do you want to do? And I just kind of came back to which has always been the truth of for me was I really like helping people. I really like solving complicated problems that people bring to us to try and help solve. And and I'm a student teacher where I like to learn things and then teach what I learn in the application that the individual needs to learn it to make an educated decision, which isn't necessarily what I had to learn, right? Um, and so that's what I'm coming back to continue to do. It's why we wrote the books. It's why we're here with you today.
It's really interesting, when people experience what you experienced, right? When you have that's legit, right? When you actually literally have bombs going in and you are hearing percussions, that's not just once again reading about it, it's experiencing it. And people have many different reactions to it. Some get PTSD, right? They literally freak out, understandably. Like it's like I'm
Mhm.
not, understandably they freak out. They have after experiences where they have fear related to it, and so it paralyzes them to some degree, right? But you said something quite different. It seemed like it gave you a renewed sense of purpose, right? You said you turned 51, you're alone. It's like, what am I going to do next? And I'm assuming, Tyson, I don't want to make assumptions here, but if you're at this stage of where you're at, you probably technically don't have to work a day again in your life. Um, right. Okay. And so you were doing this because it matters to you and you want to make a difference. So you had that one experience, but obviously you were doing it ahead of time as well. What is driving that? Like what's driving it for you to like, hey, I'm gonna show up every day, even though I don't have to?
Because I think when you, I was told by a pastor once that you try and get out of survival to get into success, and then people get stuck there, and success just becomes the game of more, and you're never really satisfied or content or happy. And the goal in life is to get to one other layer, which is to be strategic.
Mm,
And strategic is where you're playing a game of multiples of you're having an impact that can outlive you. And um, I don't know what book I got this out of years ago, but and it's a little morbid, but kind of in the world of begin with the end in mind, or we say in the book to plan backwards and execute forwards. Well, to plan backwards, it's like, okay, end of life. And years ago, I started writing, and every year I reread it and re edit it if it needs it. Usually doesn't, but it's my eulogy.
mm,
And it's like, okay, this is what I want my wife to say. This is what I want my sons to say. This is what I want my colleagues to say. This is the impact I want to have. And it's written with a purpose that I'm living into it. So it's true.
mm,
Right? And in it, it talks about making a difference in people's lives that leave a legacy beyond me, whether I'm alive or dead when it happens. But it can continually be lived out. And I think the experience with Israel, more so than any other experience, I would relate it back to we. I've done a lot of different mission trips where I've taken groups on mission trips, and you're going into third worlds a lot. We did 14 of them into Haiti,
mm.
where
Wow.
when you were landing in Haiti back when it was even safe to land in Haiti, um, when you walked off the plane, like your identity didn't matter. Your business card didn't matter. Your money didn't matter. Like you couldn't use your money. It's all barter system for most part. And the only thing that got to show up is you. And the longer you stayed in country, the more you got connected with who you really are, not your stuff, not your ego, not, like all of a sudden you all have the same basic needs. Like, where am I going to get fresh water? Am I going to be able to take a shower? Where can I go to the bathroom? And what am I going to be able to eat? Um, if you're there for a week, all of a sudden you're all on the same page, like, or you're all like equal. And then who are you?
Mm.
And to some extent, that became kind of the experience in Israel is that when everything got shut down and its bomb shelters and it was a realization or a wake up call to who are you really at your core? Are you happy with that person? Are you living out who that person is?
It's interesting. One of my early mentors in my career is a gentleman named Dan Mube, who I brought up multiple times on this podcast. And he started with what you're doing, which is keeping the end in mind and writing down that eulogy. And to what I love what you do is you're usually most people just do it as a one time exercise. It kind of freaks them out a little bit. It might impact them, right? But you've gone deep and, like, you keep on looking at it annually and update it and asking the real question, "Am I fulfilling it?" Right?
Is
And
it true?
because
Yeah.
right, and that's powerful, right? Because you're trying to maintain the integrity of it. And I'll say once again, I know I've shared this other story too. Once again, these are people who've listened to the show a long time. You'll appreciate this, Tyson. There was a gentleman who, very successful person, died. He was a church member, and the pastor was getting ready to say the eulogy, and the two sons come up and say, "Don't you dare say that my father was a great husband. Don't you dare say that he was a great father, and don't you dare say he was a great boss." And this is, by the way, was a very successful person in the community. Of course, he didn't tell us who it was, but it was somebody who was, from the outside, appeared like everything was working well, but inside, it wasn't the same. It wasn't true.
Sure.
And I love it how you're trying not to make that same mistake. Right. I call it a mistake. Now, other people call it something different, right? But of where I think that's the sum of all fears, of where you think, once again, you think you've got things working, you have things great, and you recognize that you haven't lived up to what you intended, right? And and then you go, gosh, well, was it worth it, right? If your own people closest to you are effectively ashamed of you.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote from a monk. I can't think of the monk's name, but the quote basically said, "I'm not afraid of failing. I'm afraid of succeeding at that which didn't matter." That
Mm,
in the end, what I did, what my successes were, didn't matter. So the yeah, the Bible talks about my paraphrase version. It's better to go to a funeral than a party because the funeral brings perspective that causes you to live differently. The party gives you perspective to lose sight of what matters.
mhm. Yeah, 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 for sure. And a couple other things too, just as once again from a biblical standpoint, you got the parable of the talents, and I think people forget what that means. It means when you are talented, you've been called to use your talent, right? It's
Yep.
it's not it's not it's not a choice. It's a command, right? To follow through. Otherwise, there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, right? If we hide and bury it. I think it's really fascinating that side. But let's go back a little bit, like way back.
Okay.
You mentioned briefly in the beginning, you didn't start out with silver spoon, so to speak. You grew up in a anything but. Tell us about that and then how it impacts your mindset even today.
Yeah, it's kind of how I got into finance. Dad's construction business. He got over his skis and spec homes and like the 1990 or 1980 interest rate debacle, and went through a bankruptcy. Came out the other side of it. Struggled. Caused my parents to get divorced. Dad left mom with eviction notice and four kids. I had three sisters. Um, I rode my bike about a mile to the little Bayshore Inn in Williams Bay, and they needed a busboy. I didn't really know what that was. I lied in the application. I was too young at the time, but whatever. They didn't. There wasn't technology to check any of this stuff back then. But what I knew was on Friday night I could eat all the fish I could eat because it was a Friday night fish fry. You busted for the restaurant, and then Saturday was peeled shrimp, all you could eat. And so somehow I made about $100 in tips and got to eat two huge meals on Friday and
Mm,
Saturday night and thought I was like the king. And I
mhm.
started saving my money because I grew up in an area where you kind of have the haves and the have-nots, true in a lot of areas. And the haves had this shirt that had this little horse on it that was really popular, and I really wanted one, but my mom kept
Polo.
telling me, yeah, couldn't
Mhm,
have one of those. But
mhm.
so by gosh, I'm gonna save my money. So I was putting my money in the literally it was called the Chubby Chubby Chipmunk bank account, with a little big squirrel, and this is back when interest rates were, way, 8, 9, 10%. So all of a sudden I put my money in there and I watch my money grow and be like, they keep putting money on top of my money. This is interesting. Well, fast forward a couple years later, I had gotten a different job, and it was at a marina, and I figured out if you stuck around the piers long enough at the marina, that you needed these people that wanted to go skiing at the end of the day, you needed a spotter. So you could have a boat, right? But if you didn't have somebody to help drive the boat and pull you and then spot for you, so I just stuck around and I could be a spotter. And then, like every time I went, what usually happened was if you were a spotter and you were nice and you mind your P's and Q's on these very nice ski boats, they got tired of skiing. And before it got too dark, they'd look at you and say, "You want to try or you want to go? You want to run?" Yeah, sure. So one of those evenings, I was getting dropped off, and it was in a Ferrari. Never forget it. I lied at the house I lived at because I was too embarrassed. So I was like, "Yeah, I live over there." And as I'm getting dropped off in this house, that hopefully no one's coming out of coming out of the house wondering why a Ferrari's in their driveway because it was supposed to be, nor was I supposed to be there. But I remember asking him, like, "How'd you make it? Like Ferrari ski boat? Like, what happened? What'd you do?" And he's like, "Well, I made a lot of money in my business, but then I made a lot of money in my investments."
Mm.
So, okay. And then a couple months later in the high school program, they had the stock market game that to this day teaches the worst fundamentals. It's like, here's fake money. Go make as much money as you can, as fast as you can. But this is back when, like, you went to the library and got the paper out and you were looking at the ticker symbols to try and identify which one you were going to buy. And I wanted to buy Intel. I didn't know it was Intel at the time. I just knew it had gone from 12 to 7. And I actually tried to get my mom to let me go buy it with my money from my chubby bank account. And of course, she said, "No, you wouldn't take that type of risk. You're crazy. That's gambling, right?" And I'm glad she did, right? Because had mom said yes, like everything else, when you say no, you want it. She should have said yes. I might have done it, and then who knows what I would have gone and done. Because she said no. I eventually dragged her into a stockbroker's office who convinced my mom it was okay for me to put $100 a month into two different mutual funds, which is what I started doing. And then when I was 18, she couldn't tell me anything. I bought 50 shares of IBM and 50 shares of Hewlett Packard, and like everything else, I should have just kept those. But you learn and made all kinds of mistakes. But uh, talked to my stockbroker more than I did my college professors in college, and learned what margin was, and grew my little portfolio to probably about 100 grand, and then blew it up because I concentrated in one position. Got saved my last semester of college, got hired into a firm called A.G. Edwards, which was an old brokerage firm that didn't hire 22-year-old kids out of college, and got my crack at helping people in financial services because I had been spending since the time I was 16 to the time I was probably 21, 22 when I was graduating, trying to convince my mom, it's like, this works. Like, put money away, be patient, don't overreact. Like, it grows. Like that, the capital systems work. And I figured, well, I've spent all this time trying to convince my mom and she doesn't want to hear it. Let's see if I can go convince some other people. And that became my financial services career.
That's an awesome story, by the way. I love that really is. Thank you for sharing that. That is, um, it's just once again, it's one of those examples of I love it when we learn best, right, from effort, right, and through experience. And then we also have what you described in there, some of the mistakes, right, that happen along the way, right? It's important to experience those. It's I remember one time well, actually just recently, honestly, Tyson, I sometimes I'd have this thing, I'd share all the good, right, that I've experienced with, and unfortunately, people can't all relate. Not everybody can relate to that. And so then I did a presentation, which I felt called to do. I didn't want to do, but I felt called to do to talk about growing up in a very poor area and growing up in a really tough home and having food stamps, et cetera. And all of a sudden, people were like, I want to be with you. I want to talk with you. I trust you. Right. It was interesting enough. It was my own weakness and humility that created more connection rather than ironically the successes that I thought I needed to share, to give people confidence behind it. And I think it's really special for you that you did that. So you clearly have a very interesting background. You've experienced things in your recent adult life and then in your childhood and growing up to become your career. You help companies to, once again, to transform, help owners to get to their wealth situation, to transform that area and then to help manage it, right? Because sometimes the biggest challenge is once somebody quote unquote sells their money, they freak out, right? Tyson, they sell their business.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm going to take a different pivot. That's so true in our industry. Continuing the story, my little $100,000 portfolio I was so proud of, I concentrated it into a company called Laser Vision, which was supposed to be the eye surgery. It was supposed to be cutting edge, leveraged the position, blew myself up the year before the tech bubble burst,
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah.
wiped out my entire savings, basically. Felt like an idiot. I just started as a financial advisor. Uh, Moved home to live with grandma because it was cheap, and got into a partnership with another brokerage, with another advisor, and basically started figuring out how to try and help him help his clients. He had been a classic stockbroker, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, One day he's like, I'm going to teach you what success is in this business. And I was just
Mm,
like, yes, tell me you've been doing this for 40 years. Tell me what success is in this business. And we walk out the office, and I'm not sure what I thought. I thought we were getting in this car. Nope, took a left. It's February. It's cold. We walk about 2 blocks, take another left, and we start walking into this church, and I see the sign that's like "Funeral for Bob Smith." And, I'm kinda like, "Okay, I'm going to a funeral." And we sit in the back, and it's one of his clients. It's the client's funeral. We sit through this long funeral, and, he told me, "Pay attention." So I'm kinda like, "Okay, pay attention." And we walk out after he says goodbye to some of the people that he knows. I don't know anybody, and I'm just the junior advisor that just started kinda working underneath him. As we start walking back, he's like, "Did you figure out what success is?" And I'm like, "No." And basically he was started pointing out is like, it's not the multi-million dollar portfolio he has. It wasn't the successful business that he had. It was, what did they talk about? They talked about the kitchen table conversations. They talked about the times they went and took the vacations together. They talked about the lake house. They talked about the educations he paid for and the weddings and the grandkids and the legacy. And it's not what he said, but what he meant. And now what I know is, and what I try and help, I feel our purpose in this place, in this space, is to try and help the business owner, try and help the individual move away from the more money to better life.
yeah. Mhm.
Um, Not that better lives don't come with more money, but what my lesson, going back to I would I try and prevent or caution the decisions to make more money for more money's sake,
Yeah.
because it often, that stress or that reaching often doesn't come with a better life.
Okay, I think you're relate to this, Tyson. The person who, once again, has, and I'll just use a silly example. They have 3 times life of income left. Yeah, meaning they can't really even spend it, and they won't take a first class ticket, right, to go to Australia, as an example, right? And they're like, no, 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 I have to sit in the back and coach. It's like, stop, because there's a scare. Like often, many, not all, but many who have accumulated wealth have this scarcity mindset, ironically, and and not always, but sometimes, right? And they're like, I can't spend, and then they have this fear of losing their money, right? Rather than living with their money and not being afraid of it, right? But embracing it and giving it. How do you help somebody to transform that thinking?
Gosh, thank you. This is like teeing up the softball. Love it. Um, a couple things. One, um, you bring it. We take client. This is the total relationship, is what is the philosophy that we're talking about here. The book that we wrote. I take them back to, did you ever complain when you got a pay raise? No, right? You got a pay raise. How do you complain? More money goes in the bank account. And what we've realized is, over time, especially for those that are selling their business or transitioning to retirement or going from income coming into income stopping, is they've spent their whole lives building this wealth or saving for later, not realizing later showed up, or later's now. And what we try and help clients do, our whole purpose is to help understand, what is the money for? What's the better life? What's the giving while you're living? What's the legacy to the family? Are you taking care of your parents and taking care of the kids and taking care of your health and taking care of your house and your cars? Like, what's the list of things you're trying to do? What are the income sources for it? And then what's the wealth that you have? And what we first try and do is help a client realize, it's like, okay, with this much wealth, you can take about, historically speaking, you can take about this much return from this much wealth if it's diversified and all the stewardship principles are applied. And what would you do with that? Do you want it? Most people are afraid to spend it, so then they say no. But what we found is that we ask, "What's the vacation?" And I can think of the first client that stood out, that this was like a where we had a shift in our mindsets to this better life. He was a anesthesiologist, worked till he was 72 in administration. We never thought he was going to get retired. Wife wanted him retired years early because they wanted to travel. And so he retires at 72. We're going to retire into something. We spent a lot of time talking about you can't retire into nothing. If you work your whole life with the idea that you're then going to retire and you don't define what retirement is, you work into nothing. And that's depression and that's regret and so on and so forth. And so we're going to celebrate. And here's the trip. They're going to Europe. And I said, you got to upgrade your seats. No, I said, you got to fly first class because you're 72. You're going to feel better. You're going to be out there, jet lag, da, da, da. Nope. So I looked at his wife and I said, and this is what we've learned. I said, I'm going to send $10,000 from your investment accounts into your bank account. This is 20 years ago. So that was enough to do the tickets back then. And I said, buy them, don't buy them. You got the money to do it. And the philosophy was helping transition from the later buckets to the now bucket.
Mm.
If it's in your bank, if it was deposited in the bank account, you give it's like it's extra, you have permission to spend. And I pointed out it's all extra. Look at the last year. Here, this is extra. So he calls back a couple days later. He's like, ha, I bought business class and not first class. So hence now he's thinking he's saving money, right? Great. He comes back from this trip, calls me up, and he doesn't tell me anything about Europe. He's just like, they had this hot washcloth. So if you phone, right? It was hot, and I had like real silverware, and I could have as many glasses of wine as I wanted, and a little cocktail, and I got to lay flat, and he was just beside himself the entire experience. And we don't realize the impact we make until we get miracle debris that comes back. And about a month later, I get this handwritten note from his daughter, who I'd never met, that basically was thanking me, recognizing that I was the one that pushed their parents to take one, to retire. We didn't think that was going to happen. Two, to take a trip, but three, to actually spend some of their money on this first class ticket. And unfortunately, like many times in life, I think 6 months later or so, he got diagnosed with cancer. He was deceased a year later.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And at that client's funeral, going back to I define success by trying to attend clients' funerals to realize the impact I made, which has
Mhm.
nothing to do with the money and everything to do with the life. And I got to embrace Bridget, his daughter, that was just like, and we had this connection over this letter. We got to laugh over the trip, and to this day, she's still now a client. And um, it's not impressing upon the client. They have to live some life based on my expectations. Is to help them live the best life that they can afford without regretting it and leaving whatever legacy they want to live. Um, but it's the reverse of the spendthrift, that you're afraid they're going to spend the money. Most of our
Mm.
clients have the money because they were afraid to spend it. It's constantly pulling up. Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? Do you want to try that? Do you want to set money aside for that? And after we exhaust the no, then that's what's left in the later buckets. Um, but yeah, I have more fun in life trying to give people permission to go enjoy the money and the wealth that they've built, than I do seeing the money grow.
That is a genuinely a wonderful story, and you said how you measure success, and I love it too. You went back to going to the client's funeral, right? Just like you were taught at your early stages, right? You took that lesson, you're applying to yourself, which is amazing. So that synergy is amazing. So how do you measure success in your personal life?
I have this routine that I get up every morning and I have a cup of coffee and some quiet time, a little devotion, a little reflection on what matters. That I try and go do my best, whatever that is. Then I go to bed, and before I go to bed, I have a mat that was made by a widow in we built her house in Haiti, and the only thing she could give as a gift back as a thanks was this there's like bed sheets that they ripped up, but then they weave them together. It's a mat, sits at the floor of the side of my bed, and I kneel down on that little frame of reference of my own blessings and whatever else. Then I reflect on all the things I did wrong or could have done better. which are not necessarily this laundry list, but there's a couple things. I check myself to go, did I say anything to my wife or my sons that I need to go apologize for before I go to bed? Which they have told me, especially my sons that are now in their 20s, that when I was doing that when they were in their adolescence, and I would go back to them and be like, "Hey, I was laying down. You know what? I got a little more mad today than I should have, or I'm convicted about yesterday, and I just need to ask for your forgiveness." And 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 what that has taught them. Anyway, kind of just catching myself. Then I am thankful for being forgiven. I'm thankful for I'm exhausted. I'm going to go to bed and get up tomorrow morning and try and do my best again. Uh, and that's enough.
Tyson, I'm gonna tell you something you might not hear, but job well done.
Well, well, thank you. Well, and it's a job not over. And then the other part of it is it's the job to try and help others do the same in the world that we're all called to supposed to be stretching and reaching and stealing and robbing and just taking. And it's just like, man, it's just there's a much better way.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm genuinely. This is. I just always feel grateful. One of the best parts I personally love the podcast is meeting people like you who have done extraordinary things and continue to do and continue to grow and continue to make a difference. And your testimony today, Tyson, is tremendous. And I really mean that. I genuinely say that. And so I'm proud of you. I know the Lord is looking down, shining, and I know once again we're all dirty, rotten sinners like everybody else.
Yeah.
But Amen. You know, you are walking the right path as best you can, which is it's once again it's testimony what you're saying. And by the way, Haiti, my wife and daughter have gone there, and I'm amazing. You went there multiple times, and people aren't aware it's the right so close to us, and generally thought of as the worst place in the Western Hemisphere, right? In terms of poverty and challenge, and it's even really bad down. People can't even go there, and it's really impacted my wife and daughter. So good for you for making that difference. And I could see how that sheet. I really hope my wife and daughter listen to this podcast so they can because they will be able to resonate with that, that experience because you recognize when they have nothing, right? Um, something and just the small things, the relationships are just super meaningful. Well, Tyson, we're at that point. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap this show up. The problem with time and podcasts has been, I said, truly amazing to hear everything about what you've done. How can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah. So I think LinkedIn is a pretty good way to connect. The It's almost like you're gonna have to have me back in the show and we actually can talk about the book that we published and
We
Succession and
do,
all the
Tyson.
yeah.
We are. We really are. Yeah, we're
Maybe we gotta book that on a Friday. Um, Total relationship is basically the relationship that we're trying to have with with the clients and how we help people. There's totalrelationship.com is books and podcasts and stuff like to the like. Total Succession is specific business owner and how do you leave how do you leave your business better off without you? It's a different way of looking at exiting. um Same thing, totalsuccession.com. Find us on LinkedIn. If you want to have a different conversation about not about the money and the portfolio and the allocation and how to grow it and compared to what benchmark and all this other stuff, but you want to have a conversation about how can you get someone to help you enjoy and find great contentment in the wealth that you've built and what you can do with it for yourself and for others, we'd love to have a conversation.
Thank you, Tyson. That is, I appreciate you sharing that. We'll make sure we get all of that content on our release. And Tyson, I'm sincere. I would love to have you on to talk focus time and on your book, which I know is part of the reason you're out doing these
So
podcast things.
it's all good.
But trust me, this story will be more impactful.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
what you had, and so I'm hoping your team will genuinely, if you want the raw footage and you want to slice and dice it, you guys do whatever you like with that. We're happy to give it out. Um, but anyways, thank you so much for being guest of the Moses podcast today.
Thanks for having me on, Carl.
Now, those listening, I hope you enjoy the story. This is truly one of these. If you happen to be husband or a father. And of course, it can apply to women as well. But his story is being a father and a husband and a person of faith, and how he showed how he's walking it as consistently as he can. And but also the humility of what he experienced. I hope this has been meaningful to you. And once again, I do genuinely I love it when people like Tyson in the wealth management world recognize it. Don't get me wrong, it's wonderful to get great returns, but what matters more is that the end, right? And the experiences before the end, of being able to give back and love others and feel a sense of abundance, right? For the opportunity to have. And I think Tyson's one of those partners you could have in getting that done. So, as we always like to say on the Measure Success podcast, wishing you the very best and measuring your success. Have a great day.